Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Getting Neuroimaging Right, How to Succeed in Neurodegenerative Clinical Trials. My name is Edward and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Today's webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, it's my pleasure to thank Xiko, who developed the content for today's presentation. Xiko is a leading neuroimaging contract research organization delivering advanced AI analytical insights to neuroscience to the global clinical trials market. Since 2004, they have been dedicated to delivering insights in neuroscience. Their mission is to transform the advancements of new therapies for neurological diseases through the application of medical image analysis, bringing safe and effective treatment to patients sooner. They are committed to advancing imaging biomarkers in CNS therapeutic areas such as Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's. They achieve this by developing and deploying breakthrough data analytics at scale through their remote access technology platform to improve the return on investment in drug development and reduce risk and uncertainty in clinical trials for the pharmaceutical industry. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's webinar. Romina Oxborough has over 20 years of experience in the life sciences and pharmaceutical sector. As the Senior VP Operations at Xiko, she's accountable for best-in-class delivery of neuroimaging clinical trials for global pharmaceutical companies. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to pass the mic and the presentation over to our moderator, Romina Oxborough. Romina, you can begin when you are ready.
All right, I think you can hear me now, hopefully. So thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar. And thank you, Eduardo, for the introduction. This webinar originated from a question I've been asked by our sponsors time and time again, which is, how do we accelerate startup in our neuroimaging studies? So it's a question that always comes up, and that we have two very experienced speakers today to address. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we will be hearing about the key considerations that impact startup cycle times in neuroimaging clinical studies. You will also have learned about the strategies and tactics to address those pitfalls and considerations. And also, finally, how to adopt a centralized approach to reduce cycle times in qualifying, but also managing sites globally, so anywhere around the world. And as I say, we have two very experienced speakers today that I'll introduce in a moment. And what is really important today is that you have the opportunity to ask questions. As Eduardo said, there is a chat box that you can use throughout the webinar. And I'm saying this because what is going to be interesting today is our two speakers are very experienced. They're people who have been working in clinical research, specifically in this space, for many years. Our first speaker, Nicoletta Vitale, she leads the project startup team at Xiko. She's been essentially working with sites, doing qualifications, getting them starting up studies in neuroimaging for over 8 years. And she leads a team who are constantly trying to improve their processes. And Vicky Air, who works for Recognition Health, who have a number of sites throughout the UK and the US, and who has over 15 years of clinical trial industry experience. Again, what you will hear from her is the perspective from a site, from a clinical site's point of view, of what is important about getting the sites ready and starting the studies on time. So as I say, we have two very experienced speakers today, to whom I will hand over in a moment. But first, we'd like this webinar to be interactive. We'd like to hear what you think, what your views are about this space. And therefore, the first poll question that we have is to understand about the challenges that you feel you have. So Eduardo, over to you for the poll.
Absolutely. Thank you, Romina. And I have, in fact, launched our first poll question of the day for our audience. Today, we are asking our audience, what is your biggest challenge when setting up and managing neuroimaging studies? As Romina mentioned, this is a live poll, and so our audience today can vote in real time. And therefore, we do encourage everyone to do so. Again, what is your biggest challenge when setting up and managing neuroimaging studies? Is it timelines to qualify imaging sites, access to suitable scanners, obtaining high quality data, or is your biggest challenge timely distribution of read reports? I'll give the audience a few seconds here to cast their final votes. It looks like most of you are in fact voting, which we very much appreciate. What is your biggest challenge when setting up and managing neuroimaging studies? All right, well, it looks like most of you have in fact voted at this point. Thank you again for that. I'll close the poll and we'll have a look at these results. Romina, it looks like the bulk of our audience at 54% voting that their biggest challenge when setting up and managing neuroimaging studies is timelines to qualifying imaging sites. The second most voted option at 25% is obtaining high quality data. And after that, 17% of our audience voted access to suitable scanners, and 4% of the audience voting timely distribution of read reports. Very interesting results there. Any thoughts on that, Romina?
Yes, actually, to be fair, we were betting amongst ourselves on what the answers would be and what percentages we will get, and we did actually get this right. I do expect timelines to be the most important and the most challenging item in everybody's minds when considering these studies. So I think the good news is that Nicoletta, to whom I'm handing over now, will cover all those points in her presentation. And then later on, we're going to have another poll question. So hopefully you get to interact again. And then we'll come back to Vicky. And as we said before, please ask questions throughout the webinar, and we'll answer those at the end. So over to you, Nicoletta.
Thank you, Romina. Hi, everyone. Today, I will talk about some of the key recurrent challenges when starting up neuroimaging trials, what we have to consider, and how sponsors and clinical CROs can support all the imaging processes. So I'll go to my first slide. In this first slide, I will focus on the 4 key points that we need to consider if we want to start a neuroimaging study on the right track for success. The first key one is site selection. When setting up neuroimaging trials, we need to take into account that the vast majority of trials will use very detailed imaging protocols that are harmonized and have to be set up on all the scanners in a study in the same way. So essentially, it's really important that we confirm with sites in advance if they can set up these detailed imaging protocols and if they can deliver imaging for our trials. But how do we do this? So a way to do this is to optimize the site feasibility questionnaire and ask all the right imaging questions beforehand. Just to give you some examples, we may want to ask sites what their scanner brand and software version, as only some specific software may allow more complex imaging sequences. You may want to also confirm in advance with sites if they can deliver contrast agent imaging, if this is something that they will do as part of their routine clinical practice. A second key point is getting the right contacts. So based on my experience, this is something that can make a huge difference into the activation timelines for clinical and imaging sites. So all the imaging activities can be expedited when the imaging CRO is put in direct contact with the imaging team, in addition to the clinical team, so PI and study coordinator. And that's simply because the imaging team will have all the up-to-date information about their scanner. They will be aware of all the various software or hardware limitations. And essentially, they will be also more experienced in answering all the imaging questions. So ideally, each site should be able to nominate a primary imaging contact, for example, a research imaging coordinator or a lead scanning technologist, and ensure that this person at the site can address all the imaging queries that are likely to come up during the site qualification activities. And from their end, sponsors and clinical CROs should try to proactively collect these contact details and provide these to the imaging CRO in advance before all the site qualification activities are initiated. The third key point is contracting. So we all know that contracts and all the budget negotiations can take a considerable amount of time. And all these contracts can, the status of the contracts can interfere with all the clinical trial activities, including imaging. And often sponsors may request the imaging CRO to start all the imaging procedures prior to sites contracting. This can depend on several factors, senior management demands or internal KPIs, but that's not always the best choice because most of the sites will be reluctant to start any of these imaging activities at risk. So ideally, we should really start all the site qualification procedures when contracts are already in place and finalized or very close to being finalized, unless sponsors have already worked with some of the sites before and they can provide some reassurance to sites to continue working at risk. And the last point that I want to make on the slide is about forecasting scanner changes or any major scanner events, for example, software or hardware upgrades. That's something that's really important because any changes to the qualified scanner can affect the data collection, image quality, and also the analysis results and read outputs. So ideally, we will want to use the same scanner for all subjects and time points. That's not always possible. So what we can try to do is to at least try to limit these events. And we can achieve this through a robust site qualification imaging survey, where we ask sites to confirm in advance if they are aware of any planned event for their scanner, associated timelines. And based on the responses, we can develop some strategies. For example, we may want to look for a different imaging center, a different scanner, or we can check when the first patient in is scheduled for the site and slightly postpone the site qualification activities around the first patient in date. Obviously, this is all to say that these are the key points that we want to really consider if we want to avoid all the delays with the imaging site activation and patient enrollment. Now, in my next slide, I'd like to reiterate why it is important to select the right site and why it's important to ask the right questions in advance during feasibility. So for this, I've prepared a scenario for you. So in this example, we are starting up a neuroimaging trial where we will use MRI scanners. There are two types of scanners typically used in neuroimaging trials, 1.5 Tesla and 3 Tesla, where Tesla is the unit of measurement of the strength of the magnet within the MRI scanner. So 3 Tesla scanners have double field strength. This can generate better image quality with shorter scan time for patients. So under these assumptions, we can assume that the sponsor would like to opt for these 3 Tesla scanners only. So now let's check together what happens if this key imaging requirement about the scanner field strength is not confirmed in advance at feasibility. So the imaging CRO will start the site qualification process by sending out a technical imaging survey. The site will complete the survey, and the imaging CRO will review the survey responses and will find out that the key imaging requirement is not met, as the site will flag that they only have a 1.5 Tesla scanner. This will cause a first delay in the process because instead of continuing with the rest of the activities, the imaging CRO will need to pause the activities, get back to the sponsor, explain the situation, and work with them to find a solution. Then there will be a second delay as the sponsor, and most probably the clinical CRO, will need to work together to discuss the case a little bit further. So at this point, they may want to look for a new imaging center or check if the site has an alternative scanner, or even check how many sites that have been already selected with a 1.5 Tesla scanner and revisit all the imaging requirements. So all of this may sound quite obvious, I know, but there are a surprising number of studies and sites that experience this sort of complications and delay. So such an easy question, in this case about the scanner field strength, can really save us time and lead to a quicker activation and subject enrollment. Now in my next slide, I'd like to show you the 5 key requirements for managing studies with a large number of global sites. The first key requirements to consider is the site survey. This is the first document that sites will typically receive from the imaging CRO. And the survey will confirm many important details about the scanning equipment and the site team personnel to be trained on the trial. So in my experience, what works quite well is the use of online survey instead of traditional surveys in PDF and Word formats. And that's simply because the online survey, as you can imagine, requires less admin work, and through the use of mandatory fields also tend to have less queries. So overall, it's a good option to consider. And the second thing to consider for managing a large number of sites globally is to identify the correct training method for your sites. Some sessions can be quite lengthy or maybe quite difficult to arrange. For example, on-site visits or video conferencing, as this will require all the people to be in the same room at the same time, or even to attend multiple sessions. And a better option can be the use of online self-paced training, as this sort of training can be completed obviously by any location at the site speed, in between clinical activities, so at the site preferred time. And also for the training, we need to consider giving only the necessary information for the study to the site staff. So we should tailor the content to the role of the staff at the site. There are many other online resources that will support sites in neuroimaging trials. A key one is the imaging manual. This is a key document and will include all the information about the study, including scanning requirements, how to position the subject, any rescan requirements and windows. So obviously, as you can imagine, it works well to have these translated in multiple languages. And another consideration here is to try to send these to sites as soon as possible during the trial, as we need to ensure that they have time to review the instructions, raise any questions and concerns before patient enrollment. Vicky will also talk about this later. And regarding the management of sites, it is preferred to have only one contact between the imaging CRO and the site. That's simply to ensure that there is consistency in communication. It also helps building a better relationship, working relationship with the site. And also avoids all the situations where sites have to contact multiple people within the organization and explain their issue. And the last point I would like to make is about the use of a centralized imaging database system. So this is a key system for managing global sites and neuroimaging trials. It's a system that is purely designed for imaging, so it's totally different from any other systems used for the management of clinical data. For example, the electronic data capture. So I will cover this in more detail in my next slide. So I'll spend some more minutes on this. So here we have the end-to-end workflow that the system will be able to handle. We'll start with usually starts with the acquisition of imaging data at the site end. Then there will be the upload of the imaging data. And then there are all the imaging steps that will be performed by the imaging CRO. So the first one is the quality check of the data, where we ensure that the data is of a good quality. There are no major artifacts. At the same time, there will be a metadata check where we check that all the scanning parameters used for the actual subject scans are compliant with those approved during the imaging qualification activities. And then if the data is deemed suitable for the other pipelines, the data is sent to the analysis pipeline for the analysis, and also to a group of central readers for the completion of their read reports. And finally, all these read reports and analysis results can be distributed to all the parties in the studies, like sponsors, sites, etc. The system needs to have many characteristics. I won't be able to cover all today, so I will just focus on the key ones. Definitely, we prefer the system to be web-based without needing an extra software installation. The system obviously should be accessible by all sites all over the world. Ideally, should require live training. That's very important because we know that sponsors, sites are already trained on many other systems. It's also nice to use a concise user guide that can help. And then it should be able to flag any open imaging queries. That's really important to ensure that we can perform all the activities on time and we don't cause any delays to analysis and reads. Examples of queries can be the request to rescan a subject or request to send missing data. And then last but not least, read reports. So it's very important that the system is able to handle all these imaging steps within the contracted turnaround time in order to ensure that the read reports are sent to sites as soon as possible. The read reports are key in a study in case we have obviously central reads, as these are used by the PI to aid their decision on the subject eligibility. They may be used for dosing or for the management of safety findings. So the timely distribution of these reports is really important. That's all from me. Thank you. Over to you, Edward.
All right, thank you so much, Nicoletta. And now I do think we have another poll question for our audience. This is our second and final poll question of the day. So if you didn't get a chance to vote originally, now may be a great time. Right, and for the second poll, we're asking, what do you think is the biggest challenge for sites in neuroimaging studies? And for this poll question, we have the answer options as timely provision of the imaging manuals and requirements, clear communication between sponsor, ICRO, and site, having visibility of study patients' progress post-scan, or reporting times for decision on eligibility and dosing. Again, audience members can vote on this poll in real time, just like the first one. So if you'd like, we do encourage everyone to cast their votes. It looks like most of you are in fact voting at this time. So again, we very much appreciate you voting. What do you think is the biggest challenge for sites in neuroimaging studies? I'll give the audience just a few more seconds to cast their final votes, and then we'll go ahead and share the results and see what everybody voted on. Okay, very good. Looks like most of you have voted at this point. Thank you again for that. Let's go ahead and have a look at those results. All right, speakers, it looks like the majority of our audience at 41% voting that they think the biggest challenge for sites in neuroimaging studies is reporting times for decision on eligibility and dosing. Again, that's 41%. The second most voted option at 33% is clear communication between sponsor, ICRO, and site. And after that, 19% of our audience voting timely provision of the imaging manuals and requirements. and then 7% of the audience voting having visibility of study patients' progress post-scan as their biggest challenge for sites in neuroimaging studies. Very interesting results over there, and I'll pass it back over. Do our speakers have any thoughts on this poll?
Again, very interesting results, and thanks everybody for voting. Yes, actually, and this, reporting times so that decisions can be made in terms of eligibility and dosing. Yes, we're not surprised about that, and it's really interesting that the audience essentially concurs with some of these points. So. Thank you for that, Eduardo. I'd just like now to thank Nicoletta for her presentation so far, and to pass the baton on to Vicky Air, who I introduced earlier today in this webinar as the Director of Clinical Operations at Recognition Health. And maybe I'll do a brief comment on why we asked her to join us today. It's mainly because Vicky works for Recognition Health, who are specialists in diagnosis, treatment, and care of people with Alzheimer's disease. So they work exactly in this space we're talking about today. They're leaders in that research, but also they have a number of sites in the UK and the US. So what we wanted to do today is, in addition to giving the audience the perspective of an imaging CRO on this topic, also to tap into Vicky's experience on the other side, essentially, as a clinical site. So over to you, Vicky, for your presentation.
Great, thank you, Romina. Hello, everybody. So Nicoletta has outlined the key elements required for study success from the iCRO or imaging CRO perspective. There will be no surprise that those requirements directly involve the clinical sites who are seeing the patients and getting the rest of the study set up. So I'm here today to share some insights into how clinical sites can have a positive impact on the overall imaging setup and delivery processes. As Romina said, Recognition Health have both UK and US sites, but on my next slide I'll be showing you our UK site network and how we work with our vendors. So in the UK, we have 6 Recognition Health clinics. We've got Birmingham, London, Bristol, Guildford, Winchester and Plymouth. So we cover a good proportion of the UK. Now, sponsors working on our studies or, designing these studies seek rapid setup for the recruitment activation. And as high performing sites, we really want to ensure that happens. For us, that means prioritising the right vendors, getting them set up quickly. And that ultimately leads to getting high quality imaging and the high quality data sought for every single protocol. In order to deliver our clinical trials pipeline, we manage in excess of 30 external vendors to deliver the trials, and the highest majority are imaging vendors. We invest a lot of time working with these vendors during setup and also supporting them as much as we can with the delivery and data capture required for the protocols. Now let's talk about the imaging sites with my next slide, please. Thank you, Romina. So at the feasibility and pre-site selection processes, sites typically have to respond very quickly to sponsors and CROs, and we normally find that that's about a 48-hour time frame. In order to be able to be prepared with the information required, we suggest a number of things. The detail being requested by the sponsors and CROs does vary, and the earlier the critical information is requested or provided, the sooner that any challenges can be dealt with. To facilitate that essential data collection or the information that's needed, in my opinion, as sites, we should be readily prepared with that critical detail to provide to the sponsor when they ask for it. That's in addition to the basic site details that we typically see, such as PI name, location, resourcing. We want to be able to tell them about whether we've got access to a 1.5T, 3T or both. Can we do more complex sequences such as DTI or functional MRI? Can we do MRI with contrast? And then as a PET example, what is the RSAC license status at the imaging site? These are all critical questions that the sooner we talk about them, the better. We should also be prepared to provide the imaging address And Nicoletta's talked about the speciality or imaging lead name already and contact details. These imaging speciality leads, they're your technical experts. They're your go-to for any technical questions raised during the qualification process and setup, actually, and through the delivery of the project with any challenges. So we really must maintain contact with them. They're also a critical component in the setup of the study, which I will talk about in the next slide. At the start of the imaging CRO process, the central team, such as Xiko, need the critical information about the potential imaging sites, as I alluded to in my previous slide. We may be prepared with all that key information and detailed information about imaging, but at the first stage, we may simply be asked whether we can perform MRI and/or PET, and whether that's on-site or off-site. The detail about this imaging typically follows later in site surveys, which are sent after site selection. As Nicoletta and I have mentioned, the imaging capabilities for a site is critical information, and the sooner we can target challenges such as access to 3T or not, this really helps both site and the sponsor move forward as quickly as possible. My recommendation from experience with working with a number of sponsors and a number of different scanning complexities is to try and request a copy of the imaging manual or as much information as is available as early as possible. Keep asking, keep prompting for the information, because it does help trying to clarify any questions. Share the detail with your imaging speciality needs. They'll be the leads, sorry. They'll be the ones to kind of flag any issues, ask any questions, seek any updates to information sheets as needed. They are there to help, and we can help them too. If you've had a challenging experience with one protocol, it will benefit another because you're already prepared for what has to be done. My further advice to sites is to speak up at all stages of setup and qualification, because it's always best to ask all the questions and get all the answers you need as soon as possible. Be open about your previous experience. We've got a lot of relevant experience for sponsors and CROs, just as they do for us too. My next slide is about site contacts. The importance of the speciality lead has been mentioned a good few times now, but they really are such a critical point of contact for this process. They're responsible for the first step in the scanner qualification, the setup and the delivery. So keep contact with them, keep them engaged, and really support them as much as you possibly can. Until the site survey is completed, the imaging CROs such as Xiko can't commence their review of the scanner capabilities. Xiko, as an example, use an online site survey which is circulated by email, which in our experience has been incredibly user-friendly. A slight limitation on the overall process is that sometimes early on the sponsor or CRO don't always request the imaging site lead name and contact, so sometimes those surveys are sent to the PI or the clinical trials coordinator. As a site, we keep an eye out for those emails, and we have to redirect those as quickly as possible so we're not creating a delay in the overall process. The imaging CRO will typically also issue necessary trainings and manage requests and queries by email. Now, this is great because it means as a clinical site, you can keep on top of what's going on, you can track progress, and you can chase and offer support as needed. On my next slide, you'll recognise the overall process flow diagram provided by Nicoletta. Now, the ultimate goal of this whole process is to get that high quality scan reported and released for those critical eligibility or dosing decisions, and of course all of that within the protocol window. The training that is completed by the imaging team and sometimes by the site team too is really important, and Xiko and other vendors release that in order to be able to encourage that high quality scanning and data collection. They've also got those key manuals too to work according to those, and this ensures further that you're getting high quality imaging data. Now, the clinical team role in this is to complete the trainings required, support the imaging site with the training that they also need to do, and also looking at how they can support the overall process with their patients. So of course, the clinical team are booking the patients for their scanning. Look after your protocol visit windows. This helps everyone later down the chain. And my recommendation, as all our sites try to do, is book those patients for those scans as soon as possible or right at the start of that protocol window. This allows you a bit of a buffer within the window should there be any cancellations or changes. The quality review performed by the imaging CRO is a critical imaging step. Of course, without this being passed, you're not going to get that the necessary read report needed at site level. If there are queries raised, again, as a clinical site, keep track of what's going on, support your imaging lead at site and the technical team if they need help responding to a query. This means that your queries get closed as quickly as possible and you will get that end report from the imaging CRO. Everyone has a key role to play in making sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible and to time and to those strict protocol windows. On my final slide, I want to summarise my recommendations and top tips for clinical sites in neuroimaging. So in order to accelerate study setup, ensure study success, the key tasks the clinical sites can have to have a positive impact on the overall process are as follows. You want to maintain the high quality imaging vendors that you've got on your books, on your radar, and keep essential kind of booklet or Excel of their true scanning capabilities. Then you're ready with all that key information for those submissions. Keep in touch with your imaging leads. Have regular contact with them, ask if anything has changed, ask about their resourcing and capabilities, and then you've got the most up-to-date information. Also use them for those key technical questions that you might not know the answer to. Respond rapidly to sponsors and CROs, and of course the imaging CRO request too. It's all on a time frame. If you produce any delay, then it's going to impact everyone else down the line. Request that key imaging info as soon as you possibly can. If they've got a manual, if they've got a summary of sequences, anything as early as possible is incredibly helpful to help the process. And finally, manage your site's patient scheduling within the protocol windows. Get them in as soon as possible to allow yourself a buffer if there are any challenges with imaging. But ultimately, everything that we can do at site level supports the overall process. Thank you very much. Now back to you, Romina, for questions.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Nicoletta. I think maybe to summarize a little bit is what I gathered from your presentations is from your two perspectives, essentially is that it's really important to have good communication between the site, between the CRO, between the sponsor, to work as a team and essentially all towards that same goal. It's pretty clear that the two sides of the presentations, the site and the CRO side of these issues are quite complementary. So thank you both for providing those very clear insights. So now I'm happy to say that we do have a bit of time for questions, and we have had quite a few questions coming on to the chat, but please do add any more as we'll be answering them now. And the first question I have is, and I'm not surprised by this one, is how long does it take to set up a study that includes imaging? So maybe Nicoletta, would you like to answer that one?
Yes, sure, Romina, that's a good question. So I would say usually it takes around 2 months. During this time, there will be the allocation of the project manager, so the key point of contact for the sponsor during the study, and also the allocation of the project team, including site managers or site qualification leads, data managers, etc. So yeah, 2 months, and we should consider a little bit longer if we are running more complex studies.
Thank you. So hopefully that's answered the question that we had. Another one I have, I think I would say, Vicky, this is probably for you. You talked about the imaging manual needing to be ready. So what is the minimum information that the site would need if we didn't have an imaging manual ready straight away?
Sure, okay. So, there's a lot of protocols that require a 3T, and I know Nicoletta used that in her example, but being able to specify whether we have access to a 1.5 or 3T would be really important at the early stages. I think if there are any more complex sequences beyond the standard volumetric MRI, so DTI, functional MRI as the examples I gave, it would be good to understand all sequences, including exploratory sequences. Also understanding if there's any contrast required for MRI, so for MS studies, that's another technicality that requires some kind of arrangement and sorting out. So I think just the additional challenges to what's considered a basic MRI would be good to know as soon as possible.
Thank you. Another question from our audience is, okay, let me read this correct, it's quite a long one. So what recommendations do you have for the communication with the imaging site? We work with some imaging sites where that work for clinical trials is such a small part of their business that getting timely responses can be a challenge. So the contract is held between the site and the imaging facility, not with the sponsor or CRO, and that adds to the challenge of manage them. So this is an interesting question. So Vicky, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I completely sympathise with this, with whoever asked this question. It has come up a lot, particularly with the challenges around resourcing and scanner access with changes in light of COVID and everything that happened there. I think ultimately, staffing changes, and trying to keep on top of any of the staff switches in terms of who's responsible for managing that scanner. If your speciality lead has moved on or is not accessible, then my recommendation would be to contact the site manager, who would typically be a different person, and try and escalate your query or concern and try and seek an alternative contact. They may well be your new speciality lead. So it's really making sure that you've always got an escalation point in addition to that lead contact would be my suggestion.
Thank you. All right, so hang on, I'm just, there are quite a few questions, so I'm trying to go through the chat. Okay, and I would say this one for Nicoletta probably. Yes, I think so. On managing global sites, you say that you tailor training to site roles. Do these trainings include protocol-specific and system access trainings? So on average, how many trainings will the investigator do?
Yeah, so for the training content, we typically use training modules. Each one is designed for a specific role at the site. One of these modules includes all the imaging procedures, including protocol-specific guidelines. So we'll basically detail all the scanning processes, how to scan subjects safely and correctly for the trial. And then a separate training module may include all those data transfer and data queries processes. So I will say 2 training modules should cover all the possible roles at the site.
All right, thank you. And another question, actually, Nicoletta, again, I think this one is for you. Does Xiko help with imaging manual development?
Imaging manual development, yes, of course. We do develop the imaging manual. Before that, the project manager will gather with the sponsor all the key study requirements, and these will be used for the creation of the imaging manual. And the imaging manuals is also used as the go-to document for the creation of all the training material, which is obviously based on the instructions we give in the imaging manual. And we can also help with the translation of the imaging manuals in multiple languages as needed.
All right, so, and there's one last question I think I'm going to answer now, which is, somebody's asking, okay, from the presentation, neuroimaging studies require 2 contractors between sponsor and site, so ICRO and CRO. Why is that? And where do we belong? So I'm assuming you're addressing Xiko. So we are an imaging CRO, and why do you need 2 CROs? Is because we are specialized in imaging services. Is quite different from running a clinical trial without imaging. One of the points that Nicoletta made today is, for example, the imaging database that we use that is very different from an EDC system. An EDC system will be able to cope with imaging, but also to run the workflow that we run. So it's quite a different solution. And of course, we're very happy to respond separately to this particular question and maybe explain a little bit more how we operate and what we do. So with this, I would say that we have answered all of the questions so far, and I think at this point, any other questions that pop up, you can still send them. We will deal with those separately and contact you. The other thing I did want to mention is, of course, you will be receiving a link to the webinar recording. So if you missed anything, you can always have a look at that. And I believe Eduardo, you will put on. You will issue a survey for people to fill in to give us some feedback.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. We do, in fact, have a exit survey at the end of today's webinar, which will be popping up on everybody's screen. So your participation is appreciated, as it will help us to improve our webinars, both Xikos and X-Talks. Speaking of that link with the recording, Romina, thank you. You helped me out a little bit over here because that's something that I was planning on addressing. I've sent everybody that exact link in their chat box because we also want to let everybody know that if you'd like to share today's webinar with your colleagues, you can do so through that X-Talks link. In a few business days, the recording for today's webinar will be available, and friends and colleagues that may be interested in today's webinar can access the recording via that link. So thank you for that, Romina. All right, with that, I just want to thank all of our speakers for that lovely Q&A. Romina, Vicky, Nicoletta, very much appreciated. And thank you all for a lovely live webinar today. We really appreciate it. And for our audience, we hope you all have found this webinar informative, and have a great day, everyone. Bye for now.